On the morning of December 14th, 1931, Douglas Robert Stewart Bader woke up believing it would be an ordinary day. He was 21 years old, young, confident, already known within the Royal Air Force as a gifted pilot with sharp instincts and an even sharper appetite for risk. Flying was not just his profession, it was his identity. At Woodley Aerodrome near Reading, England, winter air hung low and cold. The grass was stiff with frost. Aircraft engines coughed and rattled as ground crews prepared planes for routine flights. Inside the pilot's clubhouse, Bader stood with two fellow officers, coffee steamed in chipped mugs. Conversation drifted toward flying stories: who had pushed hardest, who had flown lowest, who had bent the rules the furthest without consequence. Someone mentioned Hendon Air Show. Someone mentioned aerobatics. Someone mentioned Bader. They laughed, not mockingly but challengingly. "We heard you really put on a show," one of them said. Bader smiled. He shrugged. He tried to dismiss it. But pride is a powerful thing, especially in young men who believe the sky belongs to them. After a moment, Bader nodded. He would show them, not because he had to, but because refusing felt worse. Bader climbed into a Bristol Bulldog biplane, a compact, single-seat fighter made of metal tubing, canvas, and ambition. It was fast for its time, responsive, unforgiving. Before takeoff, his commanding officer's words echoed clearly: "No aerobatics below 2,000 feet." Those rules were not theoretical. They were written in blood. Early aviation had already claimed too many skilled pilots who believed they could bend physics through confidence alone. Bader took off anyway. The Bulldog lifted into the pale winter sky. The engine roared steadily. Below him, the airfield shrank to a patchwork of grass and buildings. He climbed. Then he turned back. Instead of remaining high, Bader descended, low, too low. He lined up across the airfield, preparing to perform a maneuver that would impress his friends watching from below. For a few seconds, everything was perfect. Then the aircraft rolled. The nose dipped. Instinct took over. Bader pulled hard on the controls, fighting gravity, fighting momentum. But there was no margin left. The left wing struck the ground. The Bulldog disintegrated in an instant. Wood shattered, metal twisted, canvas tore. Silence followed chaos. When rescuers reached the wreckage, they found Douglas Bader alive but barely. Both of his legs were crushed. The damage was catastrophic. At the hospital, surgeons worked through the night. There was no debate, no alternative. One leg was amputated above the knee, the other below. When Bader woke, he looked down and understood immediately. His flying career was over, or so everyone believed. Doctors spoke gently, carefully. They explained the future as they understood it. He would walk again, but not normally. He would need assistance. He would live a quieter life. Flying, especially military flying, was finished. He was 21 years old. For many men, that moment would have broken something permanently. For Douglas Bader, it ignited something. Bader was transferred to Roehampton Hospital in London, one of Britain's leading centres for amputees. There, he was fitted with artificial legs. They were heavy, metal, unforgiving. Every step hurt. Learning to walk again was not graceful, it was violent. Bader fell repeatedly, onto hard floors, onto unforgiving surfaces. Each fall reopened wounds. Each failure tested patience. Doctors encouraged caution. Bader rejected it. He refused to use a cane. He refused pity. He refused to accept the idea that his body now defined his limits. Anger replaced despair, and anger became fuel. By 1932, less than a year after the crash, Douglas Bader could walk. Not slowly, not carefully, but confidently. People who did not know his story could not tell he was missing both legs. That was not enough for him. He learned to drive. He modified a car and took to the roads with the same aggression he once brought to the sky. He played sports, cricket, golf. He competed. He won. Each achievement sent a message, mostly to himself. This injury would not be the final chapter. But deep down, one desire never faded. He wanted to fly. In 1935, Douglas Bader applied to rejoin the Royal Air Force. The response was immediate. No, not because of his skill, not because of his discipline, but because of his legs. A pilot without legs was considered too great a risk. Bader did not argue. He waited. He applied again. Then history intervened. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Britain declared war. The Royal Air Force suddenly needed pilots, experienced pilots, men who could fight. Douglas Bader received a message. One test, one flight, one final chance. On November 27, 1939, he climbed into an aircraft for the first time in nearly 8 years. As the wheels lifted from the ground, something inside him settled. This was where he belonged, and he was not finished. Douglas Bader did not need anyone to tell him whether the flight test had gone well. The moment the aircraft's wheels touched the ground, he knew. 8 years away from flying had not dulled his instincts. It had sharpened them. Every hour spent angry, frustrated, and determined had been stored somewhere deep inside him. The moment he was back in the air, it all came rushing out. The Air Ministry doctors examined him carefully. They tested his reactions, his strength, his coordination. They studied how he handled the aircraft. What they found surprised them. Bader was not weaker. He was not slower. In some ways, he was more capable than before. By the end of 1939, the decision was made. Douglas Bader would return to active service. For Bader, it felt like life restarting. He was sent through refresher training to relearn modern aircraft. Aviation had advanced rapidly while he was gone. Engines were more powerful. Aircraft were faster. The margin for error was smaller. Bader absorbed everything. He trained on the Avro Tutor, then the North American Harvard, then the Miles Master. Each aircraft pushed him closer to where he wanted to be. And finally, in early 1940, he was given what he had dreamed of since the hospital ward at Roehampton, a Supermarine Spitfire. When Bader first saw it, he stood quietly for a long moment. The aircraft looked alive even while standing still. Smooth lines, elegant wings, raw power held in check. Later, he would write that it was the aeroplane of his dreams. Flying the Spitfire felt natural. The controls responded instantly. The engine delivered power without hesitation. It did exactly what the pilot asked of it and punished hesitation. For Bader, it was freedom. But freedom did not last long. In May 1940, Germany launched its invasion of Western Europe. France collapsed faster than anyone expected. British and Allied forces were driven toward the coast. By the end of the month, hundreds of thousands of soldiers were trapped at Dunkirk. The Royal Air Force was given a simple but deadly mission: protect the evacuation. Every transport ship, every small civilian boat, every soldier waiting on the beaches depended on air cover. If the Luftwaffe gained control of the skies, the evacuation would become a massacre. On June 1, 1940, Douglas Bader flew his first combat mission. He was 30 years old. He had waited nearly a decade for this moment. The Spitfires crossed the English Channel in formation, climbing steadily. The sea below looked calm, almost peaceful. It was a lie. The radio crackled with warnings. Enemy aircraft inbound. Moments later, Bader saw them. German fighters cut across the sky, fast and aggressive. Messerschmitt 109s, sleek and deadly. Training ended instantly. This was real. Bader turned into the attack without hesitation. The Spitfire responded sharply, pulling into a tight turn. The G forces pressed him into his seat. For most pilots, that pressure caused blood to drain from the legs. Vision narrowed. Blackouts followed. For Bader, it did not happen. There was no blood in artificial legs. The aircraft held its turn longer, tighter, stronger. The Messerschmitt could not match it. Bader lined up his guns and fired. The Spitfire shuddered as 8 machine guns opened up. Tracer rounds reached out across the sky. The German fighter burst into smoke and flame. It fell toward the channel. Douglas Bader had his first victory. He would not be the last. That same day, he damaged another enemy aircraft. When he landed back in England, he felt something he had not felt since before the crash: purpose. Over the following weeks, Bader flew repeatedly over Dunkirk. Some days meant 2 missions. Some days meant 3. Fatigue became constant. Losses mounted. Pilots failed to return, but the evacuation succeeded. More than 300,000 soldiers were saved, and Douglas Bader had proven something vital. A man without legs could fight. As summer approached, the war shifted. Germany turned its attention toward Britain. The Battle of Britain was coming. The Luftwaffe began attacking airfields, radar stations, and cities. Waves of bombers crossed the channel under heavy fighter escort. The Royal Air Force scrambled again and again. For Bader, there was no hesitation. He flew whenever he was needed, sometimes more than anyone thought reasonable. He was transferred to No. 242 Squadron and given a leadership role. The squadron had been struggling. Morale was low. Bader changed that quickly. He demanded discipline. He demanded aggression. Most of all, he demanded confidence. He led from the front. He did not ask his pilots to do anything he would not do himself. Day after day, he took them into combat. German bombers, German fighters. Close-range battles fought at terrifying speed. By September 1940, Bader was flying multiple sorties a day: morning interceptions, afternoon scrambles, evening patrols. On September 15th, the Luftwaffe launched one of its largest attacks. Hundreds of aircraft filled the sky. Bader engaged bombers and fighters alike. He damaged enemy aircraft. He forced formations to break apart. When he landed, barely enough time remained to refuel before taking off again. That day would later be remembered as a turning point. The Battle of Britain did not end that afternoon, but it began to tip. Bader's score climbed steadily. 10 victories, 15, 20. German pilots began to recognize his aircraft. They learned the markings. When they saw it, some tried to disengage. Bader did not let them. By October 1940, he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. By early 1941, he was promoted again. He was now leading entire wings of fighters. Still missing both legs. Still flying more missions than most men half his age. And still refusing to slow down. By early 1941, Douglas Bader was no longer just a fighter pilot. He was a commander. He had been given responsibility for entire wings of aircraft, multiple squadrons flying together as a single striking force. This was not ceremonial authority. It was real command exercised in the air at speed under fire. Bader embraced it completely. He believed that hesitation lost battles. He believed that waiting for the enemy gave them the advantage. And above all, he believed that leaders belonged at the front, not behind desks or radio sets. Every mission he planned reflected that belief. Instead of sitting back and reacting to German raids, Bader pushed forward. He led fighter sweeps across the English Channel and deep into occupied France. These were dangerous missions, often flown without the certainty of enemy contact and without the comfort of defensive positioning. They were designed to force the Luftwaffe to fight. Some within the RAF questioned the tactics. Fighter command had been built around defense, protecting airspace, preserving pilots. Bader did not disagree with those goals. He simply believed they were incomplete. War, in his view, was not won by waiting. It was won by pressure. His wing became known for its aggression. When weather allowed, they flew. When others rested, they crossed the channel. When enemy aircraft appeared, they attacked immediately. Bader flew at the front of every formation. His aircraft carried his initials, visible on the fuselage. It made him easy to identify by his own pilots and by the enemy. He accepted the risk. His confidence was contagious. Younger pilots followed him willingly. They trusted his judgment. They believed that if Bader was leading them, they would survive. Not all of them did. Losses were part of the air war. Every victory came with a cost. Bader felt those losses deeply, though he rarely spoke about them. Instead, he pushed harder, believing that decisiveness saved lives in the long run. German pilots began to recognize his style: fast engagement, tight turns, relentless pursuit. They also recognized his advantage. In close combat, Bader could pull his aircraft harder than most. He could hold turns longer. Where other pilots risked blackout, he remained conscious. It was not something he advertised. It was simply how he fought. By the spring of 1941, his reputation extended beyond Britain. German intelligence knew his name. Luftwaffe pilots spoke about him after missions. On May 7, 1941, his confirmed victories reached 20. That number placed him among the most successful fighter pilots in the Royal Air Force. It also placed a target on him. The more often he flew, the greater the risk became. Enemy pilots actively looked for his aircraft. Anti-aircraft gunners paid closer attention. Bader knew this. He flew anyway. On August 9, 1941, he led a fighter sweep over northern France. It was a routine operation by that point across the Channel: search for enemy aircraft, engage if possible, return. The sky that day was deceptively calm. At altitude, Bader's formation moved steadily forward, scanning for movement. Then, without warning, German fighters appeared from above and behind. It was a textbook ambush. Bader reacted instantly. He turned into the attack, firing as he climbed. One enemy aircraft fell away, damaged. Another broke off. But during the maneuver, something went terribly wrong. There was a violent jolt. The aircraft shuddered. Suddenly, the Spitfire was no longer responding. Later accounts would argue about what happened next. Some suggested a mid-air collision. Others believed enemy fire struck the aircraft. Still others proposed that friendly fire may have played a role. What mattered was the result. The tail section of Bader's Spitfire was gone. The aircraft entered an uncontrollable descent. Inside the cockpit, Bader understood the situation immediately. He had seconds. He released his harness and tried to bail out. The canopy came free. The rushing air began to pull him upward and out. Then he felt resistance. One of his artificial legs was trapped inside the wreckage. The aircraft continued to fall, spinning faster as it lost altitude. Bader hung halfway out of the cockpit, held in place by a metal limb. The force increased. At approximately 4,000 feet, the retaining strap snapped. The leg tore away. Bader was thrown clear. He deployed his parachute. Moments later, he was drifting down toward the fields of occupied France. He landed hard. He was injured. He was missing one prosthetic leg, and he was surrounded by enemy territory. For Douglas Bader, the war in the air was over. Or so it seemed. After liberation, Douglas Bader returned to Britain changed in ways that were not immediately visible. The country welcomed him as a hero. Newspapers wrote about his victories, his captivity, his refusal to submit. Crowds listened as officials praised his courage and determination. Bader accepted the recognition politely. But reintegration was not easy. The Royal Air Force he returned to was no longer the same organization he had left. New aircraft dominated the skies. New doctrines guided training. Younger officers, shaped by different battles, now held authority. Bader struggled with this transition. He had always been direct, blunt, unwilling to soften his opinions. In wartime, that personality had been an asset. In peace, it caused friction. He disagreed openly with senior leadership. He challenged decisions he believed weakened pilot morale or combat readiness. Some admired his honesty. Others found him difficult. Despite these tensions, Bader continued to serve. He took on administrative roles and advisory positions, though he disliked desk work. He preferred the clarity of action to the ambiguity of policy. Eventually, he left the RAF. Civilian life presented new challenges. He worked in business. He traveled extensively. He spoke publicly about war, resilience, and disability. His story inspired many. But inspiration was never his goal. He rejected pity. He rejected sentimentality. When audiences focused on his missing legs, he redirected attention to discipline and effort. He argued that physical limitations mattered far less than mental surrender. This belief shaped his post-war life. He became an advocate for people with disabilities, though not in the way many expected. He did not emphasize protection or accommodation. He emphasized capability. He encouraged independence. At times, his views appeared harsh. Critics accused him of lacking empathy. Supporters argued that he demanded strength because he believed in it. Bader himself saw no contradiction. He believed that dignity came from self-reliance. As years passed, his wartime record remained intact. 22 confirmed aerial victories, multiple decorations, leadership under extreme pressure. But numbers alone could not explain his impact. Douglas Bader represented something more difficult to measure: refusal. Refusal to accept limits imposed by others. Refusal to surrender identity to circumstance. Refusal to believe that injury defined destiny. He lived with constant pain. His artificial legs never truly replaced what he had lost, yet he rarely spoke of discomfort. He spoke of responsibility. He spoke of choice. In his later years, he watched the world change again. New conflicts emerged. New generations questioned old values. Still, his message remained consistent. Adversity was inevitable. Submission was optional. Douglas Bader died in 1982. He was 69 years old. His life did not end with a final battle or dramatic victory. It ended quietly, but the story he left behind continued. It remained in the archives, in the memories of those who flew with him, in the example he set for people told that their best days were behind them. His legacy was not perfection. It was persistence. Not because he was unbreakable, but because he refused to break. Even after his death, Douglas Bader continued to provoke argument. Some remembered him as uncompromising to the point of severity. Others remembered him as the man who never allowed weakness, his own or anyone else's, to become an excuse. Both memories were true. Bader did not seek to be liked. He sought to be effective. That distinction shaped how history judged him. In the years following the war, disability began to be discussed in softer language. Institutions emphasized care, protection, and adjustment. Bader watched this shift with skepticism. He feared that comfort could become confinement. He argued that lowering expectations, even with good intentions, risked denying people the chance to discover their own strength. This belief placed him at odds with parts of the emerging disability rights movement. Yet many who met him personally described a different man. He listened carefully. He gave practical advice. He challenged people not to feel sorry for themselves, but also not to underestimate what they could still become. For younger pilots, his story became a warning as much as an inspiration. Skill alone was not enough. Discipline mattered. Judgment mattered. Judgment mattered. Confidence, unchecked, could turn into danger. Bader himself had learned this lesson repeatedly. His aggressive tactics brought victories, but they also brought losses. His refusal to compromise won respect, but it also created isolation. His life was not a simple triumph. It was a series of decisions made under pressure. Some were right, some were costly. What remained consistent was responsibility. He never blamed fate. He never blamed injury. He never blamed others for circumstances he believed he could face directly. As aviation advanced, jet aircraft replaced propellers. Air combat moved beyond visual range. The kind of dogfighting that defined Bader's career faded into history, yet his name continued to appear in training manuals, lectures, and memoirs, not as a technical model, but as a psychological one. He represented the extreme end of resilience, the refusal to accept imposed limits, the willingness to act despite risk, the insistence on personal agency even when conditions were hostile. For historians, Bader posed a challenge: how to honor achievement without romanticizing recklessness, how to acknowledge courage without ignoring cost. His story resisted simplification, and that resistance may be his most enduring contribution. Douglas Bader was not meant to be copied exactly. He was meant to be understood. His life asks an uncomfortable question: where does determination end and inflexibility begin? Where does courage become stubbornness? And how much of limitation exists in the body, and how much exists in belief? Those questions do not fade with time. They follow every generation that faces adversity in new forms. In that sense, Douglas Bader never truly left the sky. He remains suspended between achievement and consequence, between will and reality, between what was lost and what was refused.